Hi guys, today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in September. September was a pretty good reading month for me considering the fact that I was so busy. I went on vacation, I traveled for the first time in a few years, and somehow I managed to find time to squeeze in reading, and I'm really proud of myself. So let's dive right into it. The first book that I read this month was The Daughter of Dr Moreau by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. This is the lovely Waterstones edition. Comes with really pretty forest green sprayed edges. Absolutely love it. And this is her newest release, kind of. Her debut novel, Signal to Noise, has since been re-released as well, but this is her newest, actually new novel. That definitely made sense, right? Anyways, this is kind of a retelling of The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, or at least it's a take on that story. We follow Carlotta Moreau, who is the daughter of Dr. Moreau, and Dr. Moreau creates these animal, hybrid things that live on his estate. He's trying to further science and evolution, but his benefactor wants his hybrids as basically slaves. It's a really interesting tension there, and this takes place in Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula. It's very lush. I love Sylvia Moreno-Garcia's writing. It's very descriptive and just vivid, and her prose is just so beautiful. We also follow a man who was also in the original stories as well, Montgomery Lawton, who works for Dr. Moreau. His relationship with Carlotta is really interesting and intriguing. It, my heart. I won't say any more on that, but this book was really good. I think if you're a fan of Sylvia Moreno-Garcia, this is definitely worth picking up. And even if you're not, this might be a good place to start. At least if you're familiar with the original story, this might give you a good sort of jumping in place for this author. But yeah, I really enjoyed this and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read my audiobook arc of Ballad of the Never After by Stephanie Garber. This is the sequel to Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, which is a spin-off of the Karaval series, and it was so good. This book broke me. I went through such an emotional roller coaster with this one. The series is so fun. We follow Evangeline Fox, who in the beginning of the first book makes this wish to Jax, the Prince of Hearts, basically to have the man that she's in love with fall in love with her, and doesn't quite work out the way that she expects, and ends up setting her on this journey with Jax where their lives are just very much entangled, and she becomes kind of a pawn in his games, but she tries to work it to her advantage as well. It's just so much fun. There's a lot going on in this story. There's a lot of curses happening. There's a lot of really whimsical, fantastical elements that I just absolutely loved. Jax is probably the most toxic person I've ever actively rooted for, besides maybe Daemon Targaryen, but it's just such a fun story, and the dynamic between Jax and Evangeline has been one of my favorites to read in a really long time. The ending of this book broke my brain. I was actively screaming as I was listening to it. The window in my bedroom was open as I was finishing it, and I'm pretty sure I was like, what? I'm surprised my neighbors didn't knock on my door, basically, to check that I was okay, because I was losing my mind. This was a fantastic entry into this series, and I'm literally dying for the next book. I know there was some kind of up in the air, we weren't sure if there was going to be a next book. There's definitely going to be a next book, so very excited for it. She literally just announced that there will be a third one. We don't have a title yet, but I am just waiting for any update on that because I'm so excited. This was a phenomenal book, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Book of Night by Holly Black. This has had quite some mixed reviews, so my expectations were pretty low going into it, and I found my reaction to it was kind of meh. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. In this book, we follow Charlie Hall, who has never met a bad decision she wouldn't make. She's trying to kind of rework her life and be on the straight and narrow. She's formerly a con woman and a thief, but she's trying to do right by her little sister. It's just not going so hot. She ends up wrapped up in this drama that endangers her life as well as her family's. There's this really interesting magic system that involves shadows. people have learned how to weaponize their shadows or alter them, but it can be very dangerous. It was interesting. I just feel like we didn't get enough. I didn't really understand how this magic worked well enough to really buy into it. I don't know. There were some independent elements that I really liked. She has this very interesting relationship with her boyfriend Vince, who's got a very mysterious past. And I really like where that went, but just the surrounding context just didn't do a lot for me. And Charlie really failed to capture my interest. She was fine, but she's definitely not as intriguing of a protagonist as someone like Jude from The Cruel Prince was. Obviously, Holly Black, I think, was working against a really difficult, or I don't know, she's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place with, like, people wanted The Cruel Prince, but she wanted to do something different. And I appreciate this, that this is different. I just, the main character was very unlikable, and I don't think a main character has to be likable, but she at least has to be interesting, and I didn't find her to be either. So that was my main issue with it. I think Jude in the Cruel Prince series has some very unlikable moments, but you're still, like, there with her. This one, I was just like, I didn't really care what happened to Charlie. There was also a lot of, like, telling and not showing when it came to her abilities as a thief. Like, I didn't need it quite so spelled out for me sometimes. So I don't know. I had really mixed feelings about this book. I feel like I'll probably pick up the sequel just because the ending was like, huh, okay. But it just didn't do anything, like, fantastic for me, and it did leave me a little disappointed because I know Holly Black is capable of, like, what is for me a 5-star book. So I'm hoping she kind of gets her footing a little bit better in the next one. I gave this 3 stars. I don't remember if I mentioned that. Next up, I read 10,000 Stitches by Olivia Atwater. This is the second book in her Regency fairy tale series, and it was so cute. This is definitely like a Cinderella retelling. We follow a maid who works in a really wealthy house, but whose mistress treats her like crap, and just it has a lot of interesting discourse about, like, the caste system and the wealth disparity of this time, and she ends up sort of getting a fairy, I don't want to say godfather, but a fae stumbles across her path and decides to help her because he wants to learn how to be an English gentleman. I thought it was really cute how noble he found her life to be, and, like, just how great of a person he thought she was because she was a maid and not in despite of it. So this was a really cute story. I loved the first one as well. This one wasn't quite my favorite. I still favor the first one a little bit more, but this was a great follow-up. If you like this world, it does follow different characters than the first one did, half a soul, but it's just as charming. I love the way Olivia Atwater writes fae. It's probably my favorite approach to them aside from Holly Black. It makes me smile so much, and this was really cute, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I read Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood. This is her next rom-com dealing with women that work in STEM. I thought this was really fun. We follow Bee, who gets this really great job opportunity to work at NASA, developing, like, these helmets for astronauts. She herself is a neuroscientist, and she's really excited about it, but then she finds out that her co-director partner on this project is going to be her former school nemesis, Levi. I'm not really quite sure where she got nemesis from, in that mostly he just tried to avoid her in school. And it was really obvious he was avoiding her because he loved her, at least to the reader. But you know how these rom-coms work. You know, the main character has to be totally oblivious that the love interest has any sort of feelings for her. So she's really prepared to really fight tooth and nail with him on this job. And at first it is really frustrating to see what she has to deal with as she's working on this job. Just the way that she's treated is really frustrating. And I think Ali Hazelwood did a good job of setting up the enemies to lovers in this part, but then, like, her explanation for it made sense, and it didn't make Levi irredeemable, in my opinion, which I think is a very hard balance to strike with enemies to lovers. But overall, I really liked this book. I thought Bee and Levi had really good tension. I liked the pining in this one. Pining is one of my favorite things. Yeah, I mean, this definitely does have miscommunication it's just part of the genre at this point for me. So if that frustrates you, just, be aware. But otherwise, I thought this was really cute, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then where I really loved Ballad of the Never After so much, I figured it was finally time to go back and read the original series, Karaval by Stephanie Garber. This one is interesting because the beginning of Once Upon a Broken Heart kind of has a couple of the main characters from this series, so I have a vague idea of where these characters end up, but I'm not quite sure how they get there or what Karaval was even about, so this was such a fun ride for me. This book follows Scarlett and Donatella, and they are the daughters of this governor of an island. They've never left this island, but Scarlett desperately wants to see Karaval, which is like this traveling show experience that her grandmother has told her about, but Karaval never visits the same place twice, and she's desperate. Her whole life, basically, she's continuously reaching out to the man who runs Karaval, whose name is Legend, and appealing to him and trying to get him to come visit their island. She does end up getting the opportunity to go to Karaval through a different sort of turn of events, and her sister Donatella ends up getting kidnapped, and so she's trying to find her and play this game and remember that everything is just a game, but she's having a hard time separating that from reality because it takes some really dark turns. But yeah, this was so fun. I loved the carnival kind of, or like the dark carnival kind of vibe to it. I thought it was fast paced and the mystery was really intriguing. The love interest, I was like trying to figure out the whole time and I never quite got it right. So that's always fun as well. And I can't wait to read the next one. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then I picked up this chonker. Freaking chonker. A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I was waiting for this one to come out on paperback before finally reading it because the rest of my series is in paperback. And it finally released this September. So that happened. I'm torn on this one. I definitely had my issues as I read it, but I did like getting Nesta's perspective, Nesta being our previous main character's sister. It was definitely like a character study and a mental health journey and a physical health journey as well. So that like there were some like beats that I really enjoyed in this story, but I did find it not nearly edited down enough. This was way too long. Like it just felt repetitive. Like it felt like one really long training montage, which was not my favorite, but I did like the development for Nesta's character in this book. So not my favorite in the series by a long shot, but it was fun. And considering how long it is, I did get through it pretty quickly just because of Sarah J. Maas's prose is pretty fast paced. It was very mid-tier for me. And I'm curious to see where this series goes, but I'm not like dying for the next installment. So I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Book Eaters by Suni Dean, which was a very creepy and atmospheric book that is perfect for the fall. We followed Devin in this book, who is a female book eater, which is really rare. The book eaters are this kind of very isolated group of people in England who literally eat books to sustain themselves, and they live separately from humans, and that they have like these estates that each family lives at, and they intermarry between the different book eater families. And as generations go on, females are becoming rarer and rarer. And because of this, each female in this society must at least marry twice and have 2 kids. We follow Devin after she has run away from this really weird society and is trying to find a safer life for her and her son, who is actually a mind eater, which is sort of a weird aberration within the society. They kind of act like more like vampires, and where they need like to eat human brains to sustain themselves instead of books. Mind eaters can live off of books with the help of a drug named Redemption that one of the families creates, but this family has since gone underground and this drug is impossible to find. So Devin is trying to track them down in order to get this drug for her son so that they can live separately away from this really misogynistic society that tears women apart from their families. So this definitely had like a very strong, like, motherly plot line as she's dealing with like her love for her son and like reconciling that with like hating what she has to do to keep him alive. It's very dark in some parts and very depressing, but I thought this was really interesting. This definitely had like gothic Moors atmosphere, and then again you have like this almost vampire element with the mind eaters, and it was really interesting reading about the society that Sunyi Dean created of people that they're a part of the world but they are apart from humanity. And I don't know, it was fascinating and weird, and I really enjoyed it. I did have some issues with it. I wasn't like as engaged with it as it like went on. I thought the ending was a little meandering, but it was interesting. So I believe I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Volume 8 of Spy Family came out this month, and I picked it up pretty much right away and read it the same day. I've talked about this series so much on my channel now. It's probably my favorite manga series at the moment. It's just so cute. It just makes me feel warm and fuzzy as I read it. This series follows a spy named Twilight who has to kind of create this fake family in order to complete his mission of maintaining peace between these two different countries. His adopted daughter Anya is a telepath, but he doesn't know it. And his fake wife Yor is an assassin, and he doesn't know it. So it's a really fun dynamic. I love how much these characters care for each other. This book, they're on a cruise ship, and it's just a lot of shenanigans. And we learn a lot more about Yor and like what motivates her in this book. Anya is as cute as ever. And actually, I think Lloyd or Twilight takes the back seat in this book, but he does have a couple of really funny moments. I love this volume. I love this story. It's pretty much 4.5, 5 stars just throughout. This was so charming and fun. Then I picked up the Book of Essie by Megan McLean Weir. This was on my Goodreads backlist project where I'm trying to clean up my want to read list on book reads, going from the oldest to the newest. So this one has been on my want to read list for a while, mainly because I picked it up for 50 cents and I owned it. This book is very much like the Duggar family from TLC, if you've ever seen their show. It reads very similarly to their whole family dynamic, in which you have these super religious parents going forth and multiplying and having this huge family. The father in this family is a priest at a mega church. He's kind of like a celebrity priest at this point. Their family has a TV show that follows them around. And this book follows the youngest child, Essie, who kind of sees through her family's bullshit and is trying to get out. We find out in the very beginning of this book that she is pregnant at 17, and her mom, who is sort of like a nightmare, is trying to figure out how to proceed in the best way for their family and their public image. Essie at this point knows how to play her mother. I don't know, it was interesting, but like it's also just not the kind of book that I read very often, and like it just didn't do a whole lot for me, I guess. There is a lot here about emotional abuse and neglect and physical abuse and sexual abuse within this family that on the outside seems to be perfect and conservative and well-behaving, but there's a darkness to it. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I would say go ahead and pick this up. But personally, like, it just didn't do a lot for me, and I also didn't really buy the ending very much. But yeah, it wasn't a horrible book. It just wasn't really my thing, and I only really read it because I felt obligated to, like, where I owned it. But I did only buy it for 50 cents, so I don't feel too bad about it. But yeah, I gave this 2 stars. And then finally this month, I read Signal to Noise by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which I previously mentioned is her republished debut. This follows a few teenagers in Mexico City in the 1980s, and then there's kind of this dual timeline that takes place in 2009, in which one of the main characters returns to Mexico City, having lived away for a really long time upon the event of her father's death. As we bounce back and forth between these two timelines, we find out how her and her friends got into this, like, magic, kind of. She was, like, really into records and music, and she was able to, like, manifest things with these records, and she taught her friends how to do it, and they, like, had this magic circle, basically, in which they made things happen, and perhaps took it a little too far and that drove them apart. Now in 2009, she's returning and kind of we're finding out what exactly tore these friends apart in the first place. And now it's kind of bringing them back together. This was not my favorite. I do really love Sylvia Moreno Garcia's writing. I think her prose in this is pretty good, but I did feel very unattached from all of these characters. The perspective shifts as needed throughout the story, which initially I was kind of like, oh, that's cool. But it didn't make me feel any closer to any of these characters. And the way that it is written feels like these characters and like the action is being held at an arm's length. It just wasn't my favorite. I don't know. I did like the idea of the magic system and how it's so closely woven with music, but I was left feeling very distracted as to why does it work like this? What makes certain records more powerful than others? And like, there's also hints that her grandma used to be a witch, but they like sewed magic into things. So I had a very vague sense of the magic system, and that just like wasn't my favorite. Like I wanted more information about that, and we just never got it. Just even our main character, Meche, I just didn't feel very attached to, and that was kind of disappointing for me because, again, I do really love this author. This just definitely read like her debut. Like I think she's definitely improved since this book initially came out. But yeah, I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad that it's out in the world. I think it has the potential to connect with people or like other people more than I connected with it, as where I like music, but it's like not on the same level as these characters. And I don't know, so maybe just music didn't have that inherent magic for me that it does for these characters. I don't know. But yeah, I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. And that wraps up all the books that I read in September. I didn't get to my entire TBR, which I'm a little disappointed by, but again, I think given how busy I was, I'm pretty happy with the outcome. I did read some duds and disappointing reads, but I also read some really fun and favorite reads, so it's kind of a mixed bag this month, but oh well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please feel free to leave a comment down below if you've read any of these books. I'd love to know. Also, feel free to check out my socials down in the description box, like this video, and follow my channel if you haven't already. And as always, have a lovely day. Bye.